And welcome back, everybody. After what may have been our first ever commercial break, if only we had, sponsors and made money. We are back on what you may notice from the new link is being called the Social Jordan Hour. Out of respect to the wonderful Rihanna Avenue, I want to point out that Jeff set up this link so that we could have a chat, and I didn't do that. I know our audience has grown a lot in the last few weeks, but if you go back and watch some of the older videos, you'll notice there's a fantastic member of the TYT Community panel who has been noticeably absent of late, and that is the usual Social Justice Hour host, Rihanna Avenue. This show is her baby, this Friday night emphasis on social justice topics, and so I would never presume to change the name and stick my own name in there, even though it is a funny pun. But Jeff decided to take that liberty himself, so I guess tonight we are the Social Jordan Hour. And thank you so much for joining us. So we left off talking about the tragic incident in New York of the gentleman who was choked to death for selling a loose cigarette, basically. I don't know that it's that simple, Sean. Like, I mean, this guy talked about the police hassling him all the time for everything anyway. Apparently, the reason they were there was because there was a fight that this guy had broken up and actually, done the right thing. I just
that makes it worse.
Well, and that's like I'm just saying. I don't know that the culprit here is the fact that cigarettes are regulated. Like I'm not just like I don't see that intellectual jump. I'm not ready to make that leap. Also, I want to say, and Jent covered this as well. Like if you watch the video. The guy, he's sitting there saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. I had always been taught that, if somebody could talk, if they could say, I can't breathe, then that means they could breathe. But apparently that's not the case, and this guy, for no good reason, was taken out, and as you pointed out earlier, like, there's a fatherless kid now, right? Do you have one son, you said?
He has 6 kids.
Oh, 6 kids. I thought you said one 6-year-old. I'm sorry, I was in the middle of trying to figure out how to get chat up when we were talking earlier. And a huge shout out to Jeff from coming in during his night off and getting that set up for us. Sorry, Sean, so tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why this is somehow about regulation of commerce.
No, that actually is a fair argument. That, like, I believe the same thing. If you say, like, I can't breathe or I'm choking, instead of giving, like, the choking sign, then then obviously you can breathe at that moment. But what he was saying is he was having trouble breathing. And it's a large man. He was a diabetic. Like, he was unhealthy, also a smoker. Like, he was unhealthy. But the protocol is to, give him oxygen. And they had the people there to give him oxygen. So, like, even if you, like, didn't believe him at that point, like, why do you have the paramedics there? You had 3 paramedics there that could have helped him. Also... The reason, sorry, cough button. Also, the reason I bring up the loose cigarette is because that's what the NYPD is saying. They're like, he was under the suspicion of selling loose cigarettes, and he had a gigantic rap sheet, which included 32 incidences of selling loose cigarettes. Like, so, like, all their excuses are about tobacco regulations that are, it's a non-crime, basically. And I'm not saying tobacco shouldn't be regulated, but if I buy cigarettes from the store and I pay the ridiculous $12 to $13 that it costs here because we're way overtaxed on the tobacco tax, which leads to a whole other string of problems, I should be able to sell 1 or 2 cigarettes for $1 if I want to. Like, and that man was denied that right. And, like, they didn't say he was selling it to a kid. They didn't say any of that. All that, if they would have brought it up if it was, like, pertinent information. So, like, the police totally overreacted. It doesn't take 6 cops. I mean, it might take 6 cops to subdue a person, but there was no reason to subdue him. Like, it's a ticketable offense. It's a violation. It's not even like a real arrest. Maybe a misdemeanor arrest if he's belligerent. But seriously, like, it was a non-crime, and it's unfortunate that somebody died because we have a nanny state.
Yeah, well, you're definitely wrong about that. You should be able to sell the cigarettes without any penalty, because the thing is, we don't know that he wasn't selling to minors because he couldn't have been audited by the ATF or the state tobacco board. I don't know what it's called in New York. I've only dealt with Arkansas. So like that's why we have those regulations, and that's why it's illegal to sell tobacco without jumping through quite a few hoops and paying a whole lot of taxes. But you are absolutely right. That's really like that's a non-issue. I mean, I don't want to say it's a non-issue because I know for a libertarian such as yourself, that's what everything revolves around. But what's important here is that regardless of whether or not you agree he broke a law, or even there's no debate that he broke the law, regardless of whether or not you believe that should be a law, that should have been something he could break, what we can absolutely agree on is that deadly force is not the response to selling a loose cigarette. If you want to have a fine, that's okay. You don't have to choke the guy for selling a loose cigarette. And like I say, as tragic as this is, I do have a little bit of hope that maybe something good will come out of this, because we've seen all sorts of videos of police brutality, but there's always been some way to spin it like these cops feel threatened. Sure, they overstep their bounds, but you put yourself in their shoes. You see this video, the guy is not he's threatening in stature. He's a huge dude, and I wouldn't want to make him upset. But that's not his fault. Like, that's genetics or whatever. Like, this dude is not acting in a threatening or even a particularly belligerent manner. I mean, he's being, a little upset, and I believe, understandably so. I mean, man, if that's all it takes to get choked out, like, we're in trouble, because this dude was being, just a decent person making his case, and the cops responded. It's really, let's be honest, it's one particular police officer. Now, Sean did do a good job. I'm glad you pointed this out, of other people, not stepping in and stopping it sooner, and then even more egregiously, the people who are supposed to be trained to administer oxygen are there and not doing it. So it's not just that one guy got all crazy abusive or whatever. There were failures other places. But I do want to point out, like, this guy, this was not a gang, style beatdown. Like, one cop got way overzealous and basically killed a man, and some other cops I think should answer, for being for being a passive accessory to that, but they did not, take part in it. But anyway, all that to say, maybe this is the video where we turn a corner. I know that's naive, and I'm not saying that it is, but I could see it possibly happening, because this dude, like, there's no leg to stand on for these police officers.
Well, and to be fair, you're right. That was not a gang style beatdown. That was the video released yesterday of the NYPD choking a man in the subway, because all these videos come out in like sets of 3 for whatever reason. But I just want to add, I'm like, it's not 100% evidence, but I'm like 90% sure or 99% sure he didn't sell the cigarette to a minor, because the police were throwing any excuses that they could throw for this guy. And if it was a minor, they would have mentioned that in the report. Like, they're like, he had a rap sheet a mile long of this kind of non-issue crime.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, so, I was speaking in generalities. Like, that's why we should have, like, you're arguing against tobacco regulation. I say that's why we should have it, because it's easier. I'm just saying, like, but no, this particular guy, I have no clue that he sold anything to minors. I certainly don't want to sully his name.
I'm just saying an individual level of one person selling one cigarette to another person or 2 cigarettes to another person, I don't think that's a huge deal, and it should even be a crime. And that kind of police contact, like, that leads to more unnecessary police contact, and sometimes bad things happen when you're around the police.
Yeah, I agree, and that's just where kind of our ideologies are going to take over, where we both agree there's a problem. I believe that you fix the problem by, having a better police force. The libertarian answer is going to be you fix the problem by, reducing the number of laws and regulations. But we can certainly be in agreement. Like, this is it's another ridiculous tragedy that didn't have to happen, and it's not one of those things that nobody could have stopped. Like, this was completely avoidable. We may disagree on the best way to have avoided it, but both of them could have happened for sure. Like, this was a completely manufactured situation that did not need to happen.
Both are fine. Also, the people who are calling for the commissioner to resign, like, I get it, you're outraged and you want to see somebody get punished, but I'd rather the officers involved get punished. And if Commissioner Kelly, under the Mike Bloomberg era, did not have to resign for any of the crap that he did, I feel kind of bad, like, throwing the new guy under the bus when none of the the graduating classes of officers were actually trained under this commissioner. Like the last graduating class was in January, and that was under Bloomberg's commissioner. So I feel kind of weird about telling him to resign because of the officers' lack of training.
I think that's a fair point. I've always been a little bit more sympathetic. Like, again, as soon as there's evidence of like the bureaucracy like trying to hide stuff like this, then you go for the big guys' heads or whatever. But I've always, at least for it seems like for liberals, or for me, someone who identifies as a liberal, I've always been a lot more in favor of coming down on the people who did it, unless you can prove that leadership is implicitly or is explicitly involved, with a cover-up or something else.
Well, I mean, it is a systemic problem. I just don't think it's fair to pin it on Breton when he's been the commissioner for months and Kelly was the commissioner for years. Like, there literally hasn't even been a new graduating class under Breton. Like, I feel like it's too soon to say the NYPD's violence problem is his fault.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair point there, and that'll probably be the last time I say that to you tonight. So let's go ahead and move on while we're in agreement. Our next story, we're going to leave abuses in New York and head over to the Middle East. There's been quite a few headlines of late, not only about ISIS or the Islamic State, as they're now called. Just for clarity's sake and for continuality, we're going to call them ISIS in this story. I'm sorry if that's not what we're supposed to do, but it's easier than saying Islamic State. So ISIS, of course, is this horrible organization that even Al-Qaeda has disowned, that we've seen is causing all sorts of mayhem in Iraq and Syria. And we're going to focus in on the latest kind of victim of their targeted hatred, and that's the Christian population of Iraq. Now, Iraq used to have, I don't have the full country figures, but we do have some figures for the area we'll be talking about that we'll get into in a little bit. But Iraq used to have one of the larger Christian populations in the Middle East. We'll get into when that started declining as we get into the story here. But specifically, Mosul, which is Iraq's second largest city, had a very sizable Christian population up until 2003. Then at the end of the Bush administration's Holy Crusade in the area, as George Bush allegedly identified it, himself to a then French president, there were around 35,000 Christians in Mosul. Here recently, that number has dropped down to 3,000 because, and this is the case all over Iraq, it's become increasingly unsafe for them. Again, that's not to say Saddam Hussein was a great guy, but just it's kind of the reality of it. Whenever you have these horrible despots, there is order and stability sometimes, and it was a safer place for some of these Christians. They did enjoy a little bit of a protected status under Saddam, unless he was upset with them or changed his mind, and then that would go away. But anyway, so here, whenever the whole ISIS takeover started, there were around 3,000 Christians in the city of Mosul. Last week, ISIS announced that this Christian population would either convert to Islam, pay a tax, or die. A few of them chose to convert to Islam. I don't know of many that chose to pay the tax, and then the rest of them fled, or at least most of them have fled. Apparently, a few have been killed. Specifically at the Marbenim Monastery, which is a 4th century monastery. This is an edifice that goes back, a Christian community that goes back almost to the pre-Nicene, to the ante-Nicene fathers, or it might actually be kind of concurrent with Nicaea. So this is the days that Christianity is really becoming established and really getting a foothold in the world. Like this monastery was there for that. They've taken it over. There were a few Christian clerics in place. They forced 2 priests, a monk, a guard, and a few families there who were taking refuge in the church to leave. So as far as we know, they didn't kill them, but they did force them to leave. And most of these Christians now have fled to the, oddly enough, to the Kurdish areas, which are, of course, semi-autonomous and are at odds, with the not only with ISIS but with the official Iraqi government as well, and just kind of because of a general, mutual enemy at this point, the Christians there are treated with a certain degree of safety, at least much more so than they are in ISIS-controlled parts of Iraq. So Sean, what do you think, man? Is this was the 2003 invasion? Is this the end of Christianity in Iraq?
I mean, it might be the end of Iraq in Iraq. Like we're probably going to see 3 different countries, but it's actually, like, I'm non-religious and we've been over that on the panel, but it's actually really sad. Like they've been there for over 1,000 years, and obviously, I mean, their ancestors and all that in their monastery, and it's really sad to see them like forced out or forced to convert, which is always like super troubling to me, because if religion is supposed to be about belief, can you really force somebody to believe? So like that's a whole other issue. But I mean, I can't say original Iraq invasion because that was George Herbert Walker Bush, but the George W. Bush invasion is what basically threw this place out of order. Like Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, and he was actually bad to the Kurds, which is weird because the Kurds seem like the most reasonable people in the world in this situation, but he was a secular leader, and he did like allow these people to function as like best that he could. And it's just it's horrible that these people are being sent away. I'm glad that the Kurds are taking them in. I think the Kurds are like have been waiting for a country so long, their own Kurdistan so long, that even if they don't want to take in the Christians, even if they're like hate the Christians, they're like, you know what? If we take in Christians, the UN's gonna recognize us as their own country. They're gonna be like, those guys are cool guys. Like they're doing everything and anything. Like there's so many Kurds at the border with Turkey and Kurdistan, like on that side. They're like, no, we're gonna let the Turks keep those Kurds. Like we're not even gonna unify. We just want the Syrian and the Iraqi ones to have our own country. Like the Kurds are so reasonable, and they hold down their territory like so well. Like they're the only group that when ISIS took over parts of it has actually thrown their asses out. And it's sad, but I'm glad that they're not mercilessly killing like all the Christians. Like they're allowing them to flee, which again, I wish they could stay. I wish like none of this was happening, but like fleeing is better than dying or forced conversion, in my opinion. So like we broke Iraq so badly, and it's like beyond repair. And the government that we put in there, the Shiite government that we put in there, is awful. And like if there was ever like any hope, we definitely backed the wrong horse in Iraq.
Yeah, and we've covered that in the past too. Apparently he was a much more promising horse until the U.S. presence in Iraq left, and that's whenever he kind of went off the deep end. But that's not to say there weren't warning signs there. And I think clearly, like everything else in Iraq, like the end game was not thought out well enough, and we just put somebody in power basically because he was the guy who presented himself as the most convenient at that time, and we didn't vet him well enough. I'm sorry, Sean. I actually was dropped from the broadcast for a split second there. So I lost you while you were making a really good point about the Kurds and them, how much favor they might curry from bringing in these Christians. And I say, hey, more power to them for doing it. Not only are they, doing a great thing and saving some lives, but like you said, man, these poor guys have been like clamoring for a country for so long. And you would think if any country would understand that, it would be Iraq, with its history going back to to Faisal and Lawrence of Arabia and the whole shenanigans about the Arab state that got where they were taken advantage of. Like if anybody could understand the plight of the Kurds, you'd think it would be Iraq's Arab population. So yeah, there's that. What I want to know, and I haven't been able to find this. Maybe we can crowdsource this to some of our audience. But does anybody know how much this tax is that ISIS is demanding these Christians to pay? Because it seems like not to make something trivial. Obviously, this is a pretty horrific story, but as much as we hate tax in America, like if we had to pay a tax or give up our homes, we'd probably pay the tax. So I'm guessing like this is already a kind of a marginalized community. I guess the tax is just something they can't afford to pay, but that they would just completely give up their lives and livelihood and move to a completely different part of the country. It's really a shame, but it's just a continuing trend. The Christian population has just been slowly and surely dying or relocating from Iraq, and ISIS comes along and decides it's not happening fast enough. And we should point out, this is a separate story, but I do just want to throw this out to just put out the extreme brutality and nonsensical nature of this ISIS organization. They have gone on such a just holy place rampage that they are starting now to not only blow up Islam's shrines and holy places, they're blowing up Sunni Muslim shrines and holy places. In the tomb of Jonah, which is a prophet mentioned in the Quran, not just in the other Abrahamic religions, they blew it up. It's one of their shrines, and they blew it up while claiming to be the new Sunni Muslim caliphate. So obviously, not that you need that story to know that there's not a lot of critical thought going into the actions of ISIS, but man, they don't discriminate. Like if they see something they want to kill, they kill it, and something's got to be done. I just don't know what it is. I want to bring up a point you raised. So you think I asked you if this was the end of Christianity in Iraq. You said you think this is the end of Iraq in Iraq. I assume what you mean then is you're going to get a Kurdish state, a Sunni state, and a Shia state. Is that kind of tracking with you on that?
Yeah, and like the one that's definitely going to happen, or I feel like is the most likely going to happen, is the Kurdish state. Like the Kurds already, they're holding it down. Like they already have there was like a great Vice documentary that they're already like issuing license plates. Like they've been waiting for this for so long. So that's like definitely going to happen. They're the best organized out of all of them, and like, but the Iraqi Sunni state, I assume that something is going to happen with that, and the Shiite state might end up merging with like parts of Iran. Like not to be like Iran is expanding its borders and all that, but they are Shiite and Iran is Shiite, and like it would make sense for them to either be a pseudo state of Iran or something like that. So whether we get 3 new countries out of this or 1 new country plus 2 extensions of other big Sunni and Shiite players, like it's really like irrelevant. The point is Iraq is gone. Like that it's a fiction. It was held together by basically duct tape this whole time, and it's gone. And I don't want any part of putting that Humpty Dumpty back together again. I do not want the U.S. involved at all.
I hear you.
Huh?
No, go ahead.
Except for like if we have to take in refugees or something, then like that's we did that in. It's like the one tiny good thing we did in the Iraq War, even though we created the refugees, was take some of them in. So except for like humanitarian stuff like that, I don't want any part. Like I like the Kurds on paper. I like what they're doing. They seem to be like reasonable people. They have women as a good role in their society. Like they have women fighters. Like they treat them as equal for the time being. Like they're trying to get their own country. So it seems like are closer to equal than other parts of that. Closer to equal than ISIS. But like I don't want to back anybody. I'll if you want your own state, then I'll speak out for you. I say fine. You want your Kurdish state? That's cool. But we need to stop selling weapons to everybody. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, I think there's some definite merit to that. All right, so to tie it back into our to the initial story here that started the segment. So in your imagined 3 or 2.5 state solution, where do Iraq's Christians fit in? Because obviously they're not a big enough population to get their own state, and they don't have that bargaining power anyway. Even if there was, and let's keep it real, if there was a Christian state in that region, the heat would come off Israel and the Christian state just because it would be new and not defendable would be the new place to hate. But so, do you think they end up in the hypothetical Kurdistan? Where do they go? Do they move to a different Arab country?
I mean, if they want to stay in that region, like the funny thing is like Bashar Assad is a bad person too, but like he actually treated the Christians well in his country, and like those Christians are gonna have to relocate. Like obviously, there's not a large enough amount of them to form like their fourth state. Like that's not gonna work. Like I mean, they're gonna like end up leaving. I'm sure the Turks are more secular. Like they will take some of these people. The Kurds seem like they're taking some of these people at the moment, but like I don't know if I would feel I feel bad for them because their area, like where their stuff is for lack of a better term, is in quote unquote Sunni territory. So like they're going to leave their homes because the Sunni territory is like the radicalized territory in that part of Iraq. Like it's not to say that Sunnis are inherently bad or anything. Like Saddam Hussein was a secular leader. He was a bad guy, but he was Sunni, and he didn't persecute the Christians in that area. So like it's just they're gonna end up losing their homes and all this stuff, or they're gonna pay the tax. But I don't want to pay if I'm a Christian person or a non-ISIS member. I don't want to live in a place where I'm paying a tax to ISIS that could go up easily, or they could decide to kill me as an example easily. Like they're gonna have to relocate. Hopefully that they can find somewhere safe that's not too far from their homes and like rebuild and all that.
Yeah, definitely. So
and to be fair, the same thing is happening to like you talked about the Sunni monuments being blown up. The same thing is happening to Sunnis who don't want to be with ISIS. Like they're going through the same issues. They're being forced out of their homes and executed and all this stuff. Like it's not all Sunnis. It's ISIS, or is, as they like to be called now.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to close out the segment here with what to me is obviously an appeal, but for purposes of the show, we'll call it an intellectual observation. Like Christians, let's learn our lesson from this about making bedfellows with people of power, and it cuts both ways. As we brought up here, the Christians were pretty pro-Assad because Assad kept them safe. Well, whenever you cozy up to a brutal dictator, even if it's because he's not killing you, which is a pretty good reason to support someone, you want to support the guy that doesn't kill you. But if he's a pretty horrible person otherwise, then you become associated with them, and whenever that falls apart, you become the enemy of the people he was persecuting. We saw it. We've seen it in Iraq. We've seen it in Syria. That's what they're dealing with. Also, there's another. The same holds true, I should say, for the American church, because who led the pro-war effort here? Like Bush modeled this, as a Christian crusade, and now as a result of it, because of this war that the basically got pushed through the pipe because of the American religious right, I should say. Some of the oldest, most beautiful, historical. Not only monuments and buildings, but actual, communities of living Christians are now gone, and that, there's definitely a lesson to be learned in that. So whenever people bang the drums of war, always be wary when God's name gets attached to it. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, whatever, think it through. Try to divorce yourself from from the us versus them mentality, and look for what's actually going on. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up that story, and we will switch over now to. I'm sorry, I just got a message that the camera was on Sean. There's nothing I can do about that. All right, so just a little more technical difficulty. We're moving on to our next story now. Many times on the show, we have covered stories that have basically ended with one of us asking, so where was the good guy with the gun? Well, we have found the good guy with the gun, and he is in Medea, Pennsylvania. A psychiatric patient in Medea, Pennsylvania became a microcosm, I think, of both America's gun violence problem and why it isn't getting fixed. When after ranting about a hospital's gun ban, he opened fire at that same hospital, killing his caseworker and injuring his psychiatrist. Dr. Lee Silverman, the man's psychiatrist, ended the would-be shooting spree whenever he got his hands on his own firearm and shot the suspect at least twice in the stomach, which allowed two other gentlemen, a doctor and an orderly at the hospital, to spring into action, secure the weapon, and restrain him until help arrived. Now, we'll get further into this story in just a little bit, but we're going to take a break here and try to fix an issue that we're having with the camera. So hang with us for just a second, guys, and we'll be right back.